The mission of the 19th Century Charitable Association is to strengthen our community through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. Welcome to today's program. I'm Marie Cruz, co-chair of the Art Committee. And now I'm talking about architecture, though, which is part of art to me. Many of you have driven to downtown Chicago on the Eisenhower Expressway and have passed under what, I hope I remembered it right, was called the White Elephant. It had many development ideas, but all of them fell apart. And today we're going to learn how that building, the old Chicago Post Office, was redeveloped into various corporate offices. Grant Euler, Regional Managing Principal of Gensler Architects, which is a worldwide architecture firm, was the lead architect in this building's redevelopment, and he's going to discuss the transformation of this building. From nothing practically, from rubble to what it's become today. Grant received his architecture degree from the University of Iowa and was lucky enough to also study at the University of Bath, England. He is originally from Iowa, but now lives in the community in River Forest. He's past president of the, I hope I have this right, AIA, American Institute of Architects, Chicago. He's a member of the Economic Club of Chicago and the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. He has traveled extensively around the world for personal travel and also with his firm Gensler. I met Grant when he led the Women's Architectural League on a recent tour of this building, and I thought it was incredible. We even were able to go on the green roof. So welcome, Grant.
All right, well, good afternoon. Thank you, Marie. Appreciate that warm and kind introduction. And, thank you to this large audience coming out on a cold December day, but at least it's sunny out. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share one of the most exciting projects recently completed in the city of Chicago, really in the Midwest, the old post office here in Chicago. It's an amazing project, and you're going to see a lot about it. And I'm going to tell you several stories from the past, the present, and the future, and open to many questions, hopefully comments at the end. So thank you very much. It's not only an important project for the city and the region, but I think an important project for the country. And it's the largest redevelopment project that has recently completed in the Western Hemisphere. Clearly a large development, large undertaking. I started working on the project 20 years ago with one of the earlier or prior developers that Marie mentioned. I want to thank 601W. They are the developer, the client that hired Gensler, that hired me and my firm to do this work. They are a leading private real estate acquisition firm, ownership, development, management, and really are committed to restoration, renovation, and what we call repositioning of trophy assets across the country. Marie mentioned many of you, probably all of you know the building, and you've driven through this building, driven under the building, and its prominent location in what's starting to occur as the center of gravity is moving, expanding from the center of the loop, expanding to the west and to the south. It's a historic gateway to the city and a grand dame of Chicago architecture. And before I go into looking at the current work, I want to go back a bit and look in the rearview mirror. Really important part of the history to understand what this building was, how it became to be, for us to understand how to move the building forward. going to be giving a lot of thanks to our team members because it really took a tremendous collaboration to make this happen. It wasn't a single individual. It was a team of talented professionals that really leaned in, rolled up their sleeves, a lot of sweat equity to make this happen. There was also amazing photographers that worked with us, including Tom Rossiter and Lori Westerman, amazing architectural photographers in the city that captured many of the images that you're going to see here today over the past several years. You know, you've driven through this building, you've maybe dropped off your tax returns at the front door. This is the Van Buren entrance. I remember on the news on April 15th, just before midnight, postal clerks would be out at the curb collecting people's tax returns. I've had friends of mine that grew up in the city that remember riding in the back seat of the station wagon with their parents coming up to drop off their tax returns, at the 11th hour. So the world knows this building. You've approached the building. This is what it looks like before we started any work on the building. But it really is prominent. It becomes a gateway for the city as you come in on the Eisenhower Expressway onto Congress, now the Ida B. Wells Expressway, really into the city. Or you've seen the building from the river. And this is before the renovation, but the river access, and that's been a big part of our Riverwalk Plaza, which I'll mention, and how that came to be as part of an amenity for this building. And this is the Joker, from the Dark Knight movie. It was an amazing movie set, and it sat idle for about 20 years when the Postal Service moved to their new building directly to the south. And so many different developers tried to find ways to adaptively reuse this 2.5 million square foot building. It's tremendously large. And so it became a great movie set. This is the lobby, and you'll see pictures of the lobby now that has been restored back to its fame, and it's just really elegant design. It also was in the Transformers, and you sort of see the Transformers, the Revenge of the Moon, had a leading role as headquarters for a group called Nest. You see the landing port on the roof. There is not a landing port on the roof today, but there's an amazing meadow, a 4-acre roof garden that you're going to see photos of in a second. And it's also became famous because it's included in Sim City. This was a few years ago, but it was a computer game that kids and adults build cities, and the post office was a feature. And so there's just amazing connectivity across generations. Everyone has a story about this building. And what I want to start with now is to look back and a little bit of what we call the old Post Office 101. Placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2001, so 20 years ago, the old post office, or OPO as we call it, is a one-of-a-kind building. Historic context for Chicago, both locally and nationally significant for its historic core in mail delivery. The mail facility in Chicago, it made possible efficient, comprehensive postal service for the city and its larger metropolitan area. Spans 2 city blocks. You see, even before the expressway was built here in this photograph, you see the large openings at the bottom of the right or west facade, planned for an expressway in the future. Adjacent to rail, really became a nexus of transport for mail service in and out of this city, as the city was on an amazing growth population at that time. And I'll talk a little about the years, because this building was built over a number of years and across multiple decades. Also, rail was a big distribution way of bringing mail into the city and distributing outgoing mail out of the city. And so having this building located near rail transport was really important in communications at the time, way before email, way before text, mail and postcards in and out of the building, in and out of the city. Vast quantity of personal and business letters. advertising, materials, Sears Roebuck, Montgomery Wards, Spiegel catalogs. Those all were happening at the time in the 30s, which really was driving the Postal Service to have a large building to accommodate all of that mail order catalog distribution. All forms of mail passed through the building during its more than 60 years in service. Just see some of the magnitude of what was happening in the building. And it was all mechanized. The building was a vertical building, 10 stories in height. And so the mail would come in and it would go up to the top, 10th floor, and then it would, through a series of chutes and conveyors, it would be distributed back down to the 2nd floor and out via truck, via rail, via postal carrier. It was vacated in 1997 to move across to the south to a new modernized facility, which was a horizontal distribution, more mechanized than the number of people you see in this historic photograph. And so it became a magnificent, icon's journey into, unfortunately, to decay and to, really opportunities to repurpose into various mixed use scenarios. This was sort of how we, Gensler and 601 as the lead developer, inherited this building in 2016, actually 2015, late in the year. Many different studies. We were talking about some of that over the lunch hour downstairs. A casino, very ironic. A casino is in the mix again in the city, but not in this building. Hotel, office, residential, water park, auto mall, the list goes on and on and on. But finally, in the spring of 2016, 601W out of New York City, who has purchased notable buildings in the city that you might know of, but the Aon Center used to be the Amoco Standard Oil building, Prudential, 600 West Chicago, which was the old Montgomery Ward's catalog house on the north branch of the river. 180 North LaSalle and 231 South LaSalle are all part of their development portfolio here locally. So they are a large developer and really invested in historic properties. And they put together a team. Fortunately, Gensler was part of that team to bring the OPO back to life as a hub for business and commerce, and really attracted for multi-tenant office in today's market. Tenants looking for downtown location, large open floor plates, and amazing tenant amenities. This was one of the historic photographs of that lobby entrance off of Van Buren. Next time you're downtown, stop into this lobby. It's remarkable. I know some of you have been on a tour, but it really is breathtaking, and you'll see some photos of the before and after. It's a striking design from the reputable firm of Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. The original building was in 1921. The building you're looking at in the photograph here is from 1932, and it's a grandly scaled building. You see that grand scale, 2 city blocks, to really serve as this major, the largest post office in the world in the early 30s. Art Deco was a big theme at that time. So buildings like the post office, the Civic Opera House just up the river 3 blocks, the Merchandise Mart, the Wrigley Building, all of these buildings were being designed and constructed about the same period of time. Just an amazing transformation in the city in the early 30s. You see this, you see where it sits in proximity to the current skyline of the city. And take a look at the roof deck. Obviously, this is before what we did to transform that into a amenity space for the tenants. It's visually unique because it had this design for a vehicular passageway called the Congress Parkway, built into the base, anticipating eventually a large-scale roadway, what actually became the Eisenhower Expressway. So when thinking about, this was before the bridge was across the river. but the engineers, the architects of the building envision, and the city planners a link through which what we have today that you drive under and through the building. I mentioned the building was built in phases. And so many of you may not be aware of that. Not built at one time. This is a photograph from 1921. It was referred to as the United States Mail Building and referred today as the East Building, and was sited along the west bank of the river and stretched from Van Buren in the foreground to Harrison just off to the left. So 2 city blocks. Note the track exhaust platforms and plenum off to the right in the photograph. It was also built over railway. This was an air rights building, and this photograph shows the East Building, the original building, and just to the left, you can see Union Station at the time it was there, and all the tracks, but all the tracks running north to the left of the river. Look at what's built on that now, and they all were built over air rights, where the developer bought rights from the railways in order to build the buildings on top, including the 1932 edition for the post office. Building had 6, this is East Building again, had 6 levels above grade, 2 levels below grade. It connected to the traffic at street level and the railway down below. Built with masonry, brick, terracotta. It combined classical style with an overall industrial visual character, exemplifying its primary use as a transfer center for the parcel post. Very much a working building. This was the East Building. Now today, you see the East Building, which is the darker building in this historic photo, and the east, I guess the southeast and northeast wings were demolished for the 1932 building, which is the Art Deco building, to be built around it. So it sort of encroaches and grabs the original building. And this was at the time with all of the mail order distribution, the Postal Service needed to expand. And so in the early 30s, building this large addition for the transport of mail. Some of you might know the Burnham and Bennett plan, 1909 plan of Chicago. This is a diagram that the founding fathers of the city really, and this was after the Chicago fire, identified the Postal Service here in the red box, and it was just a little bit off axis was their original thought on where that should go. Obviously, you see the river in the foreground. Some of you might have seen these illustrations in other books around the city. And the city fathers, founding fathers, really stakeholders of rebuilding Chicago wanted the post office to shift from 2 blocks north to its current location. And that's where it lays out today. So you see the yacht harbor, obviously between the red box of the post office across the river down Congress Expressway, Buckingham Fountain and Grant Park. You see the museum campus and all of the development that's happened along the lake. The post office was a prominent component of this plan of Chicago. The original dedication of the building was in 1934. And when it started construction, the cornerstone was laid in May of 1932. And at the time, U.S. Postmaster General Walter Brown laid the cornerstone for what was touted as the largest post office in the world. Construction proceeded very quickly with the building's dedication 2 years later in 1934 for cost ranging between $16 and $22 million. Now, that was a lot of money back in the early 30s, just coming out of the Depression a few years before. 601W, the current development team, has invested $800 million into the project. $800 million. So some of the fanfare of that dedication of the building. Again, look to the image on the left as the grand lobby. President Roosevelt on the right speaking and dedicating. The building is a steel frame, structure. It's 800 feet long from Van Buren in the foreground of the photograph to Harrison at the top of the photograph. It's 345 feet in width, and it equates to 4 football fields. So it's a big floor plate. It's 250,000 square foot on a single floor. And then for reference for other historic buildings, the merchandise mart fits inside the post office. So you can see the outline of the merchandise mart here, just the floor plate. And the Santa Fe building, which is just across the street from the Art Institute, and the Carson Perry Scott building on State Street, where I happen to have our offices, easily fit inside this building. So it's a very, very large building. And that's what tenants are looking for, large floor plates for office users and amenities. This is a vertical section. It stands at 190 feet high with the corner pylons climbing to 230 feet. And it translates into 12 floors in the north section. So there's a north building off to the left, and that was originally built to accommodate federal offices. Most major cities in the US, the Central Post Office accommodated all of the federal offices. And that was the same here for the Chicago Post Office. The building to the right of the image is what's the South Building, 1932 edition. And that was housed all of the mail sorting equipment, distribution, mail handling. So very much an industrial work building. Occasionally there were fires in the building. And because the building sits over 13 active rail lines, the diesel exhaust from the locomotives down below would exhaust themselves up through chimneys. There are 7 chimneys in the building. And so over time, those chimneys built up with creosote and they would occasionally catch fire. What we've done working with our consulting engineers and the contractors is we've put brand new fan systems, new liners in the flues, new scrubbers. And so the fire opportunity is all but mitigated. Really a safe way to do that. And that was something that was the first project we did, was to bring the building up to code compliance, make it a safe building for the contractors, for the construction, as well as for the end users. I mentioned before, this is the Van Buren entrance. This is during construction. You see the construction fence and just the upkeep that had not been maintained in the building, as far as maintaining the stone facade, all of the limestone, the tuck pointing, cleaning, et cetera, which was part of the redevelopment. And so as you come in through these doors, you come into this lobby space. And some of you maybe have been in this building before, but this is an image that looked pretty typical of when we first started on the project. You see off to the right, there's some plywood or broken window panes. Things had not really been maintained in the building. A lot of staining, cracked floor tiles, et cetera. And part of the agreement with the city and the developer was to fully restore back to the grandeur of this 1932 lobby. There's gold mosaic inlaid tiles. They provide visual relief, and they're adorned with a series of bronze inlaid plaques, tell the history of the post office. So this is a compilation of those 6 of many, Pony Express, steamship, airplane, stagecoach, ways that the mail was distributed throughout the US over time. And these are actually air vents. So they're actually relief vents for the air conditioning heating system. And then the gold mosaic tile surrounds. So you can kind of see those off to the left of this photograph. Up top, you see those vents and the brass and bronze medallions. There's an amazing handcrafted cut glass and bronze lanterns. You see those here, the one on the right. This is about the same size as those red phone booths that you see in London. So you really can step inside this, and they're lifted up into place with a catwalk above the ceiling and a series of pulleys and chains that lower down to the floor for servicing. We've updated, we actually sent these to a restoration contractor in St. Louis to restore. and fitted them out with LED lighting. So we can change the colors for different seasonal themes. They use the lobby for event space. That LED lighting allows us to do that. The rest of the old post office, behind that lobby, behind the office space, really is in high contrast to the grand spaces of the common areas. And it's really utilitarian. 1934, it informs the transformation. This is what it looked like. Used for processing and sorting of mail, remained consistent from 1934 until the mid 60s, when it was adapted to accommodate automated distribution and sorting of mail. And slowly over time, that sealed the fate of the building, going to automation. They wanted it to be horizontal versus vertical. Fewer people were needed in the building, et cetera. And so it started at that time, what would be the new use? This was back in the late 60s. This was what it looked like when we first stepped into the building back in 2015. You see the equipment, but you also see the peeling paint. You see the floorboards that are damaged from water. You see just the lack of upkeep and maintenance, just waiting for a new use. These machines, when they were fully operational back in the 30s and 40s, could process 25,000 pieces of mail an hour. And if you think about how it sorts through different zip codes, different street addresses out to the individual bags for the carriers, it's pretty phenomenal. And it would do it through a series of, take it up to the top floor. That red chute on the left is really a spiral slide or a spiral chute that drops the mail down and it's sorted. This was the main point of contact. This is the north lobby again, between the postal employees and the public. It contained a postal savings bank, wholesale retail postage stamp windows, which we've repurposed into security check-in lounge, concierge, which you'll see in just a second. There was a money order windows, letter drops, lockbox, information counter, and elevator lobbies at either end of this grand space. Now on the left, dispatching docks for the trucks to go out throughout the city and distribute mail extended for more than 1,500 feet, took up most of the building's first floor at street level. So we had the lobby, and then we had distribution, loading docks, et cetera. Some interesting statistics of the building. The Postal Savings Bank had just under 200,000 depositors in 1938, with over $93 million on deposit. 33 million worth of postage stamps and postcards were sold annually. It's quite a bit back in 1938, 33 million worth of stamps, postcards. They served about 2,500 transient persons who called this address for their mail. So they would stop in to pick up their mail. There was an information counter that answered over 35,000 calls a day. I'm sorry, a month. It's a lot of calls a day, including in-person inquiries as well. And so it's very different from today's automated world of waiting for 15 or 20 minutes on the phone to speak to somebody or sending emails. So these people would stop in. There were 1,000 feet of receiving platforms, a print shop responsible for over 1 billion labels printed every year. These are mail labels, postage labels. This is the second floor here showing some of that distribution area. And there was a postmaster general and an amazing suite. And part of the renovation was to restore this postmaster general's office back to its original look and feel from the mid 30s. And this has become part of an amenity space within a tenant office. Also, there was an area called the Nixie section, NIXIE, whose mission was to decipher and address all of the mail that couldn't be delivered because you couldn't read the legibility on the envelopes. How times have changed. There was also a beloved dead letter office and dead parcel post branch that was the keeper of undeliverable mail. We found a bag of that when we were doing the renovation, actually, from the 40s. And here's a really kind of a fun Chicago tidbit. You know, the hand processing of mail required a substantial number of managers to prevent theft and to ensure quality control and discipline. So this image, if you look closely, you'll see this long peeling paint, white overhead system of monitoring, and this was referred to as Stewart's Alley, named for James Stewart. He was a 1920s Chicago postal inspector who invented the system, and it was set up to narrow enclosed ceiling supported runway that ran through the sorting and processing floor, wide enough for only one person to go inside this. Go to the next slide here. You'll see a section of that on the left here. And really was a place for an inspector to observe workers and workflow activities without being observed themselves. So because there was a lot of money being sent through the mail at the time, a lot of valuables, there were a series of vaults in this building. People would send jewelry, coins, cash through the mail. And as you were sorting it, you didn't want that to be looted from the mail. And so this was something that we're allowed to sort of monitor that. You could look side to side through these windows. There were windows in the floor you could look down, and it allowed the inspectors to identify theft. And it also served as a psychological deterrent, knowing that somebody, Big Brother may be watching up above. I want to mention here, because there's many examples of this throughout the building, but 601W and Gensler worked closely with the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency and the Chicago City Landmarks to retain a significant portion of Stewart's Alley, of the scales, of the vaults, a series of artifacts, and we blended that in, this large selection of found objects, into the new space. We were talking about this downstairs over lunch as well. There used to be a canteen in the post office that could serve 1,600 employees for lunch. Had a staff of 100 people. It operated around the clock, cafeteria, sit-down restaurant service. There was a post office employees credit union bank, a first aid station, and actually a branch of the Chicago Public Library inside the building for the enjoyment of postal staff. That was very common for large post offices at the time, would be to have a branch library in their building. I mentioned it took a large team, over 17 firms that were involved in this, really a true collaboration, bringing expertise, experience together to deliver an amazing result 5 years later. 17 firms are identified here. Also, the City of Chicago Planning Department, the Mayor's Office, the Building Department, the Fire Prevention Bureau, National Park Service. This is a National Historic Landmark. It's also a City of Chicago landmark. So those accolades also required a lot of work and negotiation, navigation through approval process, and this team played a tremendous, really a team effort, tremendous effort to make that happen. So beginning in 2016, there's a few photographs of various team members from our large team here. Collective team took a deep dive into corrective measures to address exterior masonry work, repair to the underside of the building. You see the condition of some of the stonework inside and out. Down at track level, had not been maintained, so the space above the train tracks and the track platforms needed to be renovated and restored. We had a series of elevators that were upgraded, brought back into service. New elevators were added. We installed a temporary roof because of the amount of water damage over time in the building, which I'll come back on in just a second. And then we replaced the track fans that I mentioned before from a fire prevention standpoint. We went through a series of phased demolition and abatement projects before any new work started. That happened for over about, I think, 15 to 16 months, just abating demolishing the interiors and getting it ready for the new work. This is kind of the condition of one of the spaces here. Just tremendous water damage, not kept up. And how do you start renovating a building? Just think of this image and then think of some images here in about 10 to 15 minutes of the new look and feel as it is today. These floorboards are amazing because they were so waterlogged that when they expanded, they didn't have anywhere to go. And so they just warped. So these things just like loop up, almost like fettuccine noodles or something. It just was, but you see the condition. This is the east building. You see the brick to the right and the condition of the industrial sash windows, peeling paint. If you look closer, that was actually a lot of algae, growing inside the building because of all the humidity. It almost was like a terrarium. It was really interesting. So just a tremendous thing to have to clean up. And some of you, this goes back a few years, but on the weekends, you might recall seeing a helicopter flying over the building. And what it was doing was on Saturdays, some cases Sundays, this was how, with these white bags, that's how we're removing a lot of the demolition from the building, taking it by helicopter to trucks across the river on an open site. Just pretty amazing. Thinking about the amount of demolition, a lot of the equipment was sorted. We were able to salvage over 9,000 tons of scrap metal. So from a recycle standpoint, concrete was recycled, rebar, all the metal work, and some of these elements were kept in place, part of the landmark designation and kind of a recall of what used to be here. They become featured elements in the tenant space. We're also, the building achieved LEED Silver certification. So from a resilient, sustainable standpoint, the adaptive reuse, I think, is an amazing opportunity versus building new. And so when you can find buildings like this that have such a legacy and history and repurpose them for current and future uses, it really is a sustainable and resilient approach to design. And we're proud to be a part of it. A couple more images of how we cycled through and recycled during demolition, separating the various materials. Here's some of the algae and just the condition of the, we found that ROM for Chicago sign, which we thought was pretty interesting. We found a box of postcards that never been mailed, which we reused some of them in an image here I'll share with you. We found a handgun that was in the building. We had to turn over to the police. So just there were a lot of inhabitants in the building because it was a safe place to live for those that didn't have a home. And so working with the city, various agencies to help transition those individuals as well was part of our team effort. Condition of the outside. So you see the windows, you see the stonework. It's really not been maintained over the years. And somebody said the white elephant. That's a great reference. I like to refer to the building as Sleeping Beauty that's awakened now. So you'll see how she's woken up here in just a second. I want to just a minute, picture an Olympic swimming pool. This is the pool in Beijing. I was talking to some people at the table over lunch. I had an opportunity to live and work in China when the Olympics were in Beijing, the Summer Olympics, and had a chance to experience this Olympic pool. Think of this Olympic pool, over 660,000 gallons. That amount of water was in the post office, spread throughout the building. It would come in at the rooftop, leak through because there was not a roof system in place, and it would drip itself down, water through the stairways, through the chases, in through windows with blowing rain, and it would just sit there. And so it took about 6 months just to dehumidify the building, just to take the water out, to dry out the building. You couldn't start new construction with that amount of moisture. And so it really was something that we hadn't anticipated. We worked closely with McGuire, who was our consulting engineering team for dehumidification fans, and we opened up the building and had to dry it out. as well as take care of any environmental issues that were there. While all this is going on, the development team is also pursuing historic tax credits. That was a big deal for part of the landmark status. Is the benefit to the developer are taking advantage of tax credits, and they're substantial. But the trade-off is there's certain requirements that you need to maintain and fulfill. And the development team was very open to doing that. So these scales, these chutes, mail distribution equipment, some of that is retained in place and becomes feature in some of the tenant spaces. There's one of the vault doors that we've salvaged and created a feature space. This north building, the ceramic mosaic tile on the floor had to be retained in place. And so we fit that into the new space. So existing equipment, the Stewart Alley overhead view platforms I mentioned before, and they've really been restored and retained throughout the building and recall and celebrate a bygone era. So as we were going through demolition, layers of equipment, ductwork, conveyors, etc., this was what the building looked like before we started demolition. And this is in the south building. So when you remove all of this equipment, it really starts to open up the space. You know, we started to see ghosts as we were going through this thing. This is Les Vench, is one of the architects that worked with me, and he was there photographing and he just jumped in the center of the photograph and turned his head back and forth. So, you know, ghosts start to emerge. It was really interesting walking through this building with your team with flashlights and lights on our hard hats. Just the things that you would hear and see and experience. And it's really interesting now to see how it's transformed. The main lobby was restored to its original 1932 elegance. This is when it was fully scaffolded up. You kind of see the condition of the building, some of the elements I mentioned earlier with the mosaic tile and the floor. It was covered in plywood during construction here, but the marble was cleaned. Stone floors were replaced that were cracked. The ornate lanterns and the bronze revolving doors were sent off site for restoration. And we also worked through and did a whole series of forensic studies to determine what original finishes, paint colors, et cetera, were there after we had to remove a series of lead paint layers over the years. The Postmaster General's office on the fourth floor, you know, is rich with dark wood paneling and windows. So as I mentioned before, this was renovated, restored, and is part of a tenant office suite currently. One of the requirements of the tax credits and the landmark status was to restore this space back to its original use. We were on site before each floor was being demolished. We had to go through and tag elements, catalog various elements to keep, to archive before any demolition could start. The interior demolition. We had to work closely with the Chicago City Landmark staff, the National Park Service at the Illinois state level, et cetera. And you see some of those cataloging these conditions. You know, the upper right, why do you need to replace the existing wood floor? That's original. We'd like to keep that in place. So you'd have to negotiate these things. Well, it's environmentally not safe right now, so it needs to be removed and properly taken care of. And then how do we restore it or put something back in place to recall what was there before? The great lime green paint on the left side as well was not original, but has a series of really interesting colors and development over time. And so, as I mentioned, as we started to take away the interior demolition, it started to open up. And it really became, this is the south building. These are large bays. They're 35 feet by 45 feet. So from an architect planning, this is very efficient. It was a very stout building to handle all of the mail distribution equipment. And so the loading is supreme here for tenant work, for layouts. And when we took the equipment out, you started to see daylight started to flow in from the perimeter. These are triple hung windows. So they're about 1.5 times the height of the windows in this room. And these windows are very large. When you think about that amount of light and daylight, large open space, sweeping views with natural light, opening between the buildings to connect, and really starting to think about where we put new infrastructure and still maintain that openness. And this was a diagram of one of the floor plates, 250,000 square feet. So essentially, in length, 800 feet. And we started to look at how you would lay out various uses of space. And these become marketing tools for the tenants. As the developer is investing a lot of money going through approvals, they are starting to lease or try to lease tenant space. This building today is over 90% leased with some amazing national as well as local companies that have relocated. And part of that was to envision how this building could be used for their uses. So we put together a series of image boards, thinking of the early 30s was a pretty prominent time in the city of Chicago, coming out of the pandemic. Now they were coming out of not too far out of the Spanish flu or the pandemic of right after World War I. So there's this time of exuberance and opportunity and really looking for a bright future that we think we're in right now. And so we recalled what used to be there from a time period, early 30s. So thinking of the materials, the detailing, and how we integrate that into the new uses, this age of enlightenment, if you will. You see some more of those images and think of these images as I get to the final project photos here coming up. So, this is an image from one of the boat tours here on the upper image, looking at the building as you're heading south on the river, get a little closer under the bridge at Van Buren. You're starting to see what the condition of that building looked like. This is, 5-6 years ago, this is what you would see. Coming up close, you'd start to see that original east building there, which is in the foreground, the 1932 addition wrapping around with its Art Deco detailing, but just kind of weeping for a future. And it certainly has seen a revitalization. So, a forgotten legacy in a city with great civic pride from 1921. Now we've reawakened the legacy. It started in 2016, really just finished the project earlier this summer. A couple tenant spaces are being built out right now. Uber Freight took a large leasehold, which I think is really interesting that a freight company wants to be back in a building that was set up in Chicago to deliver freight. And Walgreens has moved their technology team into the building. So a Chicago-based company. And many, many others, including Ferrara Pan, that used to be here and not too far in Forest Park, has their corporate headquarters located in the building, and many, many others. So the past 5 years have really been, phenomenal. So we went through this inspirational images that I mentioned. We used virtual reality as a marketing tool for tenants, potentially that wanted to move into the building. You can't really walk them through the building when it's full of water and damaged. Sign up here. This is going to be a great space. But we use VR to envision what the building could look like, and that was really a big help. Walgreens was the first tenant that signed on as really a testimony to the opportunity, and many others followed. So this was developed 5 years ago. The Chicago Post Office will return to its former glory, living up to its landmark status in a new era. The experience will be bold, dynamic, spirited, and thoughtful. Chicagoans and visitors alike will proudly welcome the Chicago Post Office as their new post to work with passion, live well, and celebrate often. And so these are some images of the building today. So the exterior, this is taken from the Riverside Plaza. Series of tenant signage here, this outdoor terrace that's open to the public with Park District hours. You can access this, 7 days a week, overlooking the river and activating that part of the city. This is that grand entrance, the tax return drop off. And so we've added planters, we've restored the stone, all new windows, replaced the revolving doors. Lighting, looks beautiful at night if you go by. The lighting design team did an amazing job. And then coming in, this is the lobby today, a symbol of commerce for the city of Chicago, an amazing legacy. You see the concierge desk to the left. That used to be a place to buy stamps. That's been repositioned through historic renovation. You see the chandelier lights up above. You see the gold tile, the medallions, etc. And the marble's been cleaned, windows replaced, etc. And just some of the detailing, the clock, the plaques, the directories. The upper left is an image before and how it's been restored to look like it did in 1932. Here's some close-ups of that. You start to see just this elegance, this spirit of enlightenment of the 30s that has been, almost 100 years later has come back into this building. And the tenants and the owners and the property managers and the security staff, the architect team is so proud of this work. You can just see it when you talk to them. And I know those that had a chance to walk through and tour not too long ago experienced that in the space. This is the concierge space for tenants. So as you come in, a visitor to the building, the concierge would call up, the tenant would come down and greet you here. So it's just a cafe space of respite to sit back, and you start to see historic photographs, found objects, this type of material and detail and architecture in the furniture that you would see from the 30s. And it really has a nice, you'll see this constantly through these tenant amenities. There's over 200,000 feet of amenities in the building for the tenants. It's another close-up. These are some of the photographs that Lori Westerman took, close-ups of the building, and we've used these in large blow-ups in the backdrop. This is the food hall off to the left. Will be opening in the spring. It's run by an operator called 16 on Center. They have food halls across the country, and there's 15 different vendors. This will be open to the public. So springtime, as we get through this winter, stop down and it's going to be local curated, local cuisine from various local vendors. And it really is meant to be an amenity for the neighborhood as well as for the tenants in the building. We use conveyors. This is an image on the right, conveyors that we moved up vertically and became an art piece, as well as this logo for entrance into up to the second floor through the escalators here on the image on the left. Postcards, we have a postcard wall on the second floor that has postcards of post office views from all over the country. And it's kind of an Instagrammable moment. You stop and some of the postcards are seen on the upper right, the close-ups, including one of the Chicago post office as well. A brand element that our team was able to be involved in and really created this sense of space that was so important. And we created this Telegram Lounge. This is a tenant amenity space. The race for tenants in today's market is about creating amenities. And so there's a bocce court here, there's billiard tables. They use this space for events. I know some of you have been in events in the building. The Society of Architectural Historians had a gala here a couple months ago in this space. And it really is a great experience. And you start to see the look and feel of hard to believe what this building looked like in the earlier photographs to what it does now. Tenant lounge space here, active fireplace, views out to the city, to the river, just really creating this character of what was there before, but doing it in a contemporary way. This was called the Vault. It's actually with the first project that was finished in the building, and it became their leasing center, their marketing center. And now it's a tenant lounge. So they'll have various events in here. We exposed the ceiling here, which was clay tile, which was a very interesting structural system in the late 20s. And we felt rather than cover that up, let's leave that terracotta tile exposed and hang some very interesting lights, period piece lighting from that. Another view of the vault, just very curated, focus on detail. Place to focus, this is called the library. I mentioned Chicago Public library had a branch in the building. We felt to bring that back, not as a library, but as a quiet space to sit and work, individually or with your colleagues. So this is on the second floor, as well as all these other spaces I've seen or I've shown. Another shot of that library space. We have a fitness center called the Boxcar, 25,000 square feet. It's a tenant amenity for tenants in the building to have access to the fitness center. You can see kind of the Boxcar branding and identity. It's important for tenants to not have to spend their space or their dollars on a fitness center in their own tenant space. They can use a shared space on the second floor, which is what all of these amenities I just went through are for tenant use. Large conference center for 400 seats. It's another view of that fitness center. Has a boxing ring as well, so pretty interesting. And amazing Pilates and yoga and free weights and spin classes. And this is something to attract tenants into that building. And one of the reasons why the building is so highly leased as a percentage at 90%. And then I mentioned the meadows or the outdoor plaza, that early image of the rooftop, 4 acres, almost 4 acres of rooftop. Harris Shout was our landscape architect. We've done a lot of work together and they did just an amazing job. This is an amenity for the tenants in the building. So there's a quarter-mile jogging track. There's paddle courts or pickleball courts here for winter use. A basketball court. They've held music concerts up here and various events. There in the lower right image is an outdoor lounge for events. They've had a lot of weddings and bar mitzvahs there. And that's an image of that. So you're 10 floors up in the air in the city. You're away from all the noise. And you're just in this amazing respite. 40,000 different plant species on the building, and they're all indigenous. They're all local, and we've also actually created a series of beehives up there because they're great pollinators. And so this rooftop it remains very interesting all 4 seasons. So you see it here. This is actually in the early fall. It'll look equally beautiful in January, although you might want to bundle up to be up there, and spring and summer. So it really is meant to be an interesting, and with amazing views of the skyline from this rooftop. You start to see some of that here, lit up at very, very nice at night, evening events. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grant. I'm sure a lot of you would like to go see the building. I was so lucky to go see it with a group of about 40 people. And when you're there, it is amazing because I kept saying, I bet some of the seniors could not hear Grant speak, but I don't think it mattered to them because they were just ogling and looking at all the amenities in the building. It was fantastic. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
Grant, I'm Jim. Are there any places you can buy, or is it all rental?
So a good question. Are there any places to buy, or is it all rental? The current program for this developer is all office space. So there's no residential, there's no hotel. We looked at a mixed use program in the past, but currently it's all tenant office space.
Great. So there's no people living in apartments? Or...
No rental apartments, no condos. Got it. So the tenants lease office space for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years for their office space.
With so many people working at home now, has this affected your ability to find tenants that usually are looking for reduce their office space?
Good question. And everybody can hear the question too. I have a tendency to repeat the questions. I can repeat it. So in the current situation of people reluctant to return to office for commercial office spaces, has that impacted the ability to lease? It really hasn't. It's the The leasing is over 90% leased, which is phenomenal during a pandemic the last couple of years. The return to office, Uber just moved in, Uber Freight moved in, and they have, I think, 1,500 people in the building. I think there are probably 1,200 people in the building today in that tenant space. People want to be together. People want to collaborate. People want to learn from one another. Gensler does a lot of interior planning work as well. And that's part of the research we found is that, people of all generations in a safe and healthy way want to be back together in an office space. Next question.
2 questions. First, is there any name to the building besides the old post office? Any other name to it? And secondly, the second question is, does anybody refer to the street that runs from the old post office to the lake as Ida B. Wells Drive as opposed to Congress Parkway, which I will always call it?
2 great questions. We spent probably, first question was on the name of the building, the old post office. And we brainstormed with the owners, the developers, the leasing team for almost a month. And we ended up with the old post office. So the second question, it from the exchange, the Spaghetti Bowl exchange by UIC, they're coming east. It is now referred to as the Ida B. Wells Expressway. Congress Parkway. It's you're right. It's and then some people refer to it as the Eisenhower Expressway, which actually stops at the Kennedys.
Aside from the lobby, are there other spaces that tourists could go and investigate? Is any of it, or are there specific times when tours are available?
Yeah, so there are often tours. What's open to the public would be the grand lobby space that you can go into anytime while the building's open. The food hall that will open in the spring. So you saw some photographs of that. And then the Riverside Plaza to the east side along the river. There's also a west side plaza that is always open to the public. Others will be by tour or invitation from tenants. So tenants may invite you as a visitor to their space.
Okay, my question is, if you want to go see those things, where do you enter?
So you would enter on Van Buren, right just to the west of the river there. Going in, where do you enter the building? You would enter the building through Van Buren, just west of the river, into that grand lobby space.
This is a question from one of our viewers at home, Jill Diskin. Thank you, Jill. She said she visited the renovated post office a week ago when she was in the area for Thanksgiving. It's absolutely glorious, but she was disappointed there was no brochure or pamphlet on the history and renovation of this magnificent building. Are there any plans for such?
That's a great question. We just talked about that not too long ago with the development team and the property manager, having a brochure that there is online in the absence of a physical brochure to Google the old post office, and you'll see some amazing collateral from the marketing team using to lease the buildings.
All right, again, Grant, thank you so much for your great presentation.